Thank you very much. It's very nice to be here. I'm really honored by the invitation to discuss this subject that is very close to my heart. So, of course, by my name, it's obvious where I'm from. So I am originally from Brazil. And I've been for the past 4 years working at Leiden University, conducting research on different fields, but focusing a lot on the global south and the diversity that comes from the geographical and the language issues. And before that, I spent a little bit over a decade working at the Brazilian Agency for Support and Evaluation of Graduate Education. That is the agency in charge of regulating, evaluating, and providing most of the funding of the Brazilian science system. My role there was to be one of the coordinators of this national evaluation that in the country is very high stakes. And the language issue and the regional relevance of research, imagine in the case of Brazil, which is global south country with over 200 million people and about twice the size of the European Union, the types of challenges that we have to investigate things that are relevant to us. And we know that in science, there's always a pressure for the lingua franca, for English as the main output. And if it's not English, it may not be as good or as relevant. And the reality is a little bit different from that. And that's something that I hope to discuss today. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, hope you can see it.
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so what we have here in this sense is a discussion regarding, just take out of the way, perfect. So it's about valuing local language and regional relevance in research. Why is this important? As I mentioned, I will present a little bit from my background and from the data that I used for this study. This data, of course, is originated from Brazil. And hopefully, who knows, in next year's event, we can come back with a partnership looking at the Turkish information to see a parallel for that. But just to give you an idea of how the research evaluation system works in Brazil. So what I have is this. It was originated because of funding needs. What happens is that Brazil has one of the oldest ongoing research evaluation systems in the world. It started in the 1970s based on funding needs. So what happens was there was an agency in charge of distributing funding, and the funding to be distributed to the different institutions in a country as big and in a research evaluation, in a research system that was growing very fast, it was a little bit hard to deal with the specific demands of the system. So instead of evaluating individual requests, the system decided that it was important to evaluate the research units, the research programs in the country, and distribute the funding according to these results. Okay, and so what happens is that the system was initially discussed and built in the way it is today from 1965. And at that time, there was already a demand for accreditation processes. And these accreditation processes meant that for a new research unit to start operating in the country, it needed to be approved before that happened. And then the permanence meant that these units would be periodically evaluated. And then based on their development and based on their performance, they would be able to continue to operate. That means a very high stakes evaluation because the results of the national evaluation system impacts the funding. The better you do, the more money you have access to, and the more freedom you have to use this money in more innovative ways to do research. And of course, continuity, because if you do not perform well, you are shut down. So in the last evaluation, we evaluated over 4,000 research units in the country, and 141 were shut down exactly because they did not perform as hoped for. And then this all leads to central, robust data collection. What happens is, when you have such a high stakes evaluation, where the impact on the system is so big, you need to have very robust data sets to perform your evaluation. So for decades, the agency that I work for had different types of systems to collect information from the different research units in the country. And that data is part of a system that is called Qualis. So it's a valuation system for scholarly publication that was established in 1998. What happened is that before that, as the system was not yet that big, it was possible to do a more qualitative type of analysis of the different types of output from research programs. But as the system grew too much, it was really impossible to continue doing that. So the Qualis system was created to evaluate journals, to evaluate the publications in those journals, and to evaluate other types of products. For example, books, conference proceedings, technical, technological production, even artistic output from research programs in the arts. So all that was built and designed in a way that could allow the evaluators to take a very good comparative look across the different fields. And to focus specifically here on the journals, what happens is that we have a classification process in the country that's based on what we call a mother or sister area definition. In this process, what we do is we collect the information from all the research programs in the country, everything they have published at the microdata level. And from that list that surrounds 60, 80,000 different papers every year, what happens is that we look at that information and look at all those different journals that were used for each evaluation period of 4 years. We're talking about 20 to 30,000 different journals. And then we decide who owned those journals in a sense. So what areas, and we have a classification system that's based on 49 different evaluation committees, disciplinary committees like in sociology, philosophy, mathematics, and then biotechnology and so on. So these areas, they are in charge of evaluating the journals that are considered to be of their discipline. And so the mother area is usually the area that publishes the most, and sister areas are not necessarily publishing the most, but during negotiations, they understand that the terminated journal will be transferred to that area. So what happens, and this is just for you to have a sense of the system. So we have here a comparison of journals that were published and the papers associated to it, like this. So you see a diagonal, a dark diagonal here, that, for example, if you look at the cross of area 2 with area 2. So it's computer science, the code for the area computer science. So 530 journals with Qualis rankings that were originally defined by computer science were used in the evaluation programs by computer science. So it means that 43.91% of all the journals used by computer science research units to publish were evaluated by computer science, by the Committee of Computer Science. They determined the quality of those journals. But you have other situations, for example, like this one. You have that researchers from computer science published in 11 different journals that were actually evaluated by the field, the discipline, the Committee of Chemistry. So less than 1% of those publications, but then you can have an idea. So each of the disciplines of the committees evaluate the journals that are more relevant to them. Okay, with that, what happens in the classification process is that copies the agency based on sets of indicators that are defined by the agency and by the committees. They calculate what they call quality reference. So based on indicators, you have a scale that goes from A1 to A4, being A1 the highest, then B1 to B4, and CNP is not a journal. We don't consider it a scientific journal. But then, for example, the highest classification would be A1, then A2, then A3, then A4, B1, B2, B3, B4. So based on the indicators, a performance of a journal is calculated. Okay, and what happens once there's this calculation is that the 49 committees determine what is the final quality. So they look at the suggestions of the indicators of this reference grade, and they decide based on indicators and criteria that they propose, and that's approved by a council and also made public through the community. They decide what is the actual grade of that. Why is that important? Because of this. So here I have an analysis of around 600,000 papers over a period of 6 years. Okay, what we have, and I grouped here the 49 areas in 3 broad groups, the life science, exact science, technology, multidisciplinary, and the humanities, including also the social science. So you see that you have a dark blue bar here, and this dark blue bar represents the percentage of journals that maintained their classification. So, for example, if you look at the life sciences, A1, you see that around 90% of all the journals that the indicators said, oh, this should be an A1, they were kept as A1 by the peer review committees. But a few of them were demoted, so to say, to an A2 or A3. So you see that if you look at the highest possible classification, A1, you see that for all areas, there is a high correlation between what indicators are saying and what the peer review committees consider to be excellent publications. But as we go down the scale, you see a very interesting thing. In all areas, there's a decrease of the percentage of what the different indicators can capture. But when you look at humanities and social sciences, you see that after A2, that's already only half of the indications are considered on point. You see that the whole relation between indicators and the evaluation is completely lost. So in this system where you have a 2-level classification of what would be considered a quality of research, we are able to capture things that indicators cannot. So indicators suggest, but then the peer review committee said, okay, I look at something like this that you say that would be an A3, but I think this is a top journal. This is an A1. Or the opposite can happen. For example, here you have, a journal that is A2, that's in the top 20% of publications, you can consider it to be a B4 or B5. So the committee can make this adjustment, okay? And why this is relevant? Because of this kind of situation. This is an analysis of the Web of Science coverage of Brazilian journals and papers. And this is possible to do this type of analysis because of the data collection that I mentioned. So since we collect data from research programs, and research programs are extremely motivated to report everything they do because it will impact the funding and it will impact the very existence of their research unit. So they report everything they do. And because of that, we have this information. So what you see here on the left is the percentage of journals that are covered by the Web of Science. So this is the dark, the blue. And then on the right side, we have the percentage of papers that are covered. So if you see, for example, biological science, see that nearly 80% of all journals used by Brazilian programs to publish their outputs in biological sciences are indexed by Web of Science, and 91% of the papers are indexed. So it means a higher percentage of publications in those journals, above average. It's the exact opposite when you go to look at multidisciplinary that would include, for example, environmental sciences, humanities and social science, and so on. So you see that the percentage of journals that are covered is much smaller, and the percentage of papers is even smaller. So in those journals, we have a below average number of publications. And that is significant because what happens here is this kind of situation. So I got the same group of papers, around 600,000. And from the information on these papers, titles of these papers, and metadata of these papers, built this semantic map. So what we have here are clusters of different types of publications. So you see at the top in green, patient, lesion, receptor, caregiver, nurse. So you see, obviously, you're talking about health sciences. Then for the blue, you have more like nanoparticles, leaf, property, bone, and you see that it's more in the life sciences. The yellow one, we have soil, nitrogen, soybeans, so you see more agricultural sciences. Then you have purple, that's more environmental sciences. You have the bluish, that's more in the natural sciences. And then you have the big red group that is completely detached almost from the rest of the research conducted in the country, where we would have social science and humanities. So education, law, democracy, bibliometric analysis, and so on. So you already see an interesting perspective of this detachment. But since I had the microdata of all the publications and I could match them to the Web of Science, this allowed me to do this. So here I have an overlay of coverage. Yellow means that around 80% of the occurrences of those terms are indexed by the Web of Science. The greenish is about half and half, and the purple means almost nothing is covered by the Web of Science. So this is a very relevant issue. So we know that the classification of journals, and especially the redistribution of the different grades of the journals in the social science and humanities is very much related to that, because you see that most of the research being conducted in those areas, they're not indexed by the Web of Science. So that's an important thing. Where is that research? And why is that type of coverage relevant? Because of the language issue that is the focus of what we wanted to discuss here, and this is kind of a result of that. So what we have here is the same data once again, but now we have at the top what's indexed by the Web of Science, at the bottom what's not indexed by the Web of Science, and we have languages. So you see that by the different groups of disciplines, you have that for most of the content covered by Web of Science is in English. You have a very small amount in Portuguese, the language speak in Brazil, and even lower in Spanish. We don't do a lot of Spanish in Brazil. So, but when you look at everything that's not you see a lot of Portuguese. So that is really, really relevant. So what you see is the main databases are covering topics that not necessarily are comprehensive. As I mentioned, issues such as education are not being found in these major databases. And they are covering most publications in English. So create a language barrier. And not only a language barrier to publish, but a language barrier to consume the content as well, because Brazil is a country with a terrible literacy level in English. So a recent study analyzed the CVs of researchers in Brazil and noticed that only around 30% of the researchers declare that they have a high level of English, proficient level of English. And a study from the British Council analyzed that in Brazil, less than 1% of the population speaks English with some level of fluency. So the language is a barrier, an important barrier. And then what happens is that if you look at regionally relevant databases like Latindex, Cielo, and Readily, you can see that on the left, what publications we are finding in these databases that are published locally in local language. And then on the right, the part of the English that has been missed. And you see, for example, that Latindex has a very high coverage of Brazilian output in Portuguese, mostly, that would not be found in other databases. And this is quite relevant for the importance of national repositories, in the sense that these repositories allow the publication of different types of output. And this impacts also the whole idea of open access, because this is an analysis of a secondary group of papers and journals. And what I did here is I looked into the percentiles of the Brazilian classification. So the top 12.5% journals, then to the 25%, 50%, 75%, and bottom 25. And I categorized the APCs that are charged for these open science journals. So we have at the top, no APC costs. So we're talking here about diamond open access. Then you have APCs that are quite low, up to $250. And then you go all the way to the APCs over $2,000. And what you see here is once again quite revealing that in the diamond open access and in the journals that may charge APCs, but reasonable, decent APCs in the sense that you're actually charging for processing the article. You're not making a huge profit on top of it. So what you see is that there is a very high percentage of Portuguese, and here, sorry, the legend is inverted, so Portuguese is the blue one. So what you see is that blue, 67% at the top, 12.5% of diamond publications are in Portuguese, because these are Cielo, Readily, and Latindex, giving possibility for people to publish. Because imagine a country like Brazil, where minimum wage is under $250 a month, and that the stipends, for example, of a PhD candidate are around $400 a month. So imagine the impact that would have to publish an open access paper paying $2,000 of APCs. That's completely absurd, because you could fund like 6 months of a PhD candidate with the APC required to publish a single paper. Then the diamond is always an important thing, not only to allow people to publish, but also to allow people to publish in their own language. And then there's pressure. So this is a proposal from a working group that was built in Brazil, wanting to internationalize more our research. And they are pushing for the assessment model that should induce internationalization in the publication of articles and in the indexing of journals. And that means that they want to value more only what's in English and only what in Web of Science, Scopus, dimensions, and so on. And that's not the way to go, because this process is already happening because of initiatives of each country. So if you look at the evolution of articles in Brazilian journals, and this is an interesting study by Fernando Bagel from Argentina and Abel Parker, that's the director of Cielo in Brazil, with colleagues. And you see that over the last 10, 15 years, the percentage of publications in Portuguese is decreasing and the percentage of English is increasing. But that does not necessarily mean that we're trading things. Because, for example, this is the page of a Cielo journal, a recent edition of some of the papers listed. And what you see here is, for example, you have this situation. So you have a paper that you have abstracts in 4 different languages, and you have the text and the PDF in Portuguese. But then you already have others that are in English. So there's a translation to English. But you also have this. And this is something that the Diamond platforms in Latin America are completely prepared to, that is already to offer 2 versions of the same study. It's not self-plagiarism, it's simply the same paper in 2 versions, because you understand that English is relevant for international communication. Portuguese is relevant for local understanding and local uptake of the research result. And this is also quite relevant. And with that, just to make a summary, and we open for questions. So regional databases cover a higher percentage of scholarly output, and this is common for every single regional database. You may find the same happen, for example, in China. In Latin America, significant yet decreasing percentage of the papers are in the local language. So you have a slow movement towards English, but you have this wonderful bilingual or even trilingual thing that can allow you to communicate internationally and to reach local audiences as well. Third point, most journals within Latin American indexing systems are open access, either in the Diamond model or with low APC. You see journals in Latin America with APCs as low as $6. You're pretty much paying just for the expenses, operational expenses. It's very common to have journals that you pay $50, $100, that it's reasonable for an economy where minimum wage is not over 1,500 euros, like in many countries in Europe. And then the mixed method assessment of scholarly publications can help value what's unseen by primary databases. So if we focus only on international databases that care only about international issues, we lose a lot of relevant research. So I have written about Brazilian issues and have got return from some journals saying, yeah, but nobody cares about Brazil. So can you transform your study into something that's broader? No, because I want to reach a Brazilian audience. And sometimes that leads me to publish in Brazilian journals, especially when I'm talking about policy issues. And with that, I end the talk and open for questions, leaving here my contact and opening the doors so we can look for potential collaborations. To look, for example, how the Brazilian case and the Latin American case could relate to the Turkish case. And that's it. Thank you very much.